we have so much to learn. Actually, Dr. Lim just spoke about the Philippine experience, just handling ASEAN Center for Biodiversity. So we have actually more to learn also from other ASEAN practices. No? So I'll just pose one question to our two panelists, and then I'll invite members from the audience to join me in, of course, asking also questions to Dr. Quimba and Dr. Lim. So let's talk about the way forward, okay? And you mentioned, Dr. Lim and also Dr. Quimba, some of the things that we can do, right, in order to avoid this tragedy of the commons in more of our island destinations and other tourism destinations. So can you identify specific practices where private sector can take more proactive role in ensuring sustainability? So examples of, let's say, partnerships, not just in the Philippines, but maybe also in ASEAN.
Well, actually, I already mentioned partnership with for the ASEAN Center for Biodiversity, we provide capacity building programs, experiential learning programs, and this is something that we right now we're just working with the governments, but we are welcome to work with the private sector for these experiential learning programs, and then also for identifying. For baselining as well, we can also provide initiatives for assessment of certain areas that have potential for tourism activities, and partnership with the communities, which I already mentioned. We need to identify what are the communities that are also adopting a sustainable practice in coming and livelihoods. And we can support these communities so that we can promote sustainable livelihoods that are already protecting the biodiversity in areas within and adjacent to your ecotourism sites.
So, Dr. Gimba, does that mean that given your recommendation to establish, let's say, carrying capacity in Boracay, can we still pursue, let's say, more aggressive growth or development in other destinations, or do we really need to really do all these carrying capacity studies for all destinations? Because as you said, that would incur or lead to some economic and social costs for those that are already investing in tourism, particularly in the part of the private sector and the communities.
I think it's really important that we understand the carrying capacity of all these areas. And we have learned from the experience of Boracay that we cannot just really keep on receiving tourists without regard to how much the island can accommodate at a given period in time. And we have learned in a very difficult manner that we should really limit and even limit, not even just limit the number of people arriving, but also the types of activities that are being conducted and held within the beachfront or near the beachfront and even near the other areas. So, and I think this idea of understanding the carrying capacity of all our tourism or areas should also be conducted also in all other tourism areas, not just in Boracay, because we have also seen in other areas, for example, in northern Luzon, that the influx of so many people at a given period in time is actually it's good for the industry and good for consumption because there's a lot of people buying things, but it's also pushing too much demand on the natural resources of that area. Water becomes scarce. There's some type of inflation because of scarcity in all other products and goods. So there's really a need to understand not just the carrying capacity also, but maybe even the flow of tourists. Where do they usually go at certain periods in time, and so we can actually manage and even promote areas that are not receiving as many tourists.
So in both your recommendations on baselining, right, conduct of assessments, and then identifying, let's say, tourism flows, then we have actually a common agenda that could be pursued also together with our partner universities and research institutions and government. And that is really the conduct of research, but at the core of really good research is the data, the right data, right? And that not just the right data, but the relevant data, meaning for the data to be really shared also on time so that we could generate more results from it. Okay. Now I'd like to invite members of our audience, if you have any questions addressed to either Dr. Lim or to Dr. Quimba, please raise your hand and then state your name and your organizational affiliation and identify the resource person or panelist to whom you're addressing your question to. We have so many young people in the room, so I'm sure you're all curious to know some answers related to sustainability. Yes, any volunteers? Yes.
Thank you, Twinkle. I'm with the American Chamber of Commerce. I travel a lot around Southeast Asia, and I'm just wondering if you might be able to cite some very, very good examples from other countries, because Thailand is expected to get 40 million tourists this year. I was down in Bali for a wedding a few months ago, and they get actually more tourists, international tourists, than they have people living on that island. So this challenge is faced by many destinations in Southeast Asia. So I was wondering if you can cite some examples of those that are handling this without having to actually close down the facilities, and which is, I think, Boracay. I didn't have the second question in answer to. Has this been successful? And will you recommend that, is it necessary to do it in other areas that are similarly challenged in the Philippines?
First example, the one that I presented earlier, the community that is producing the fruits, the products from the mangrove. This is in Bali. So they are in some areas, some resorts are already patronizing products from the communities that are protecting the mangrove areas. And they gather the fruits sustainably because they don't cut the mangroves. I think they've learned a lot from the experience in Banda Aceh, where a lot of the areas that were protected by mangroves were the ones that survived the tsunami. So that's one example that I saw. For the closure, there are actually several resorts now in Southeast Asia that have also closed down. Like after Boracay, Thailand also closed down the beach. The beach, I don't recall, but this was in the film of Leonardo DiCaprio. So they also followed the same route. But when you close down, it's already too late. I think what the positive thing that came out from the Boracay closure was that the other resorts have started to come up with their own environmental program and sustainability program before the Department of Environment can even close them down. In Siargao, for example, during the time of the closure, the mayor of Siargao, who's an advocate for sustainable development, was already talking about certain measures to make sure that the tourism there is sustainable. Also, El Nido started to come up with some measures as well to prevent a drastic measure such as closure.
Uh, because we want evidence-based answers. So to be honest with, I don't have an evidence to say whether the closure is successful or not. Because the study is ex ante, so we really just have models to say what's going to happen if we close. But we haven't really verified, now that we've seen that it was closed and it was opened again, we haven't really seen what's the impact. As I've shown in the slide, there are poor and non-poor people in Malay, and there are also poor and non-poor people in Boracay, and they would be affected by some of the changes now that some activities are not allowed near the beach, or there's a limitation in the number of tourists and even in the number of establishments near the beach. So who would be benefiting and who wouldn't be? Who would be bearing the cost of these changes? Those are the things that maybe would have to be analyzed further in maybe another study, or before we can really say that there's a benefit or that the closure is successful. If we're going to look at it just from pictures and just from anecdotal evidence, we see that perhaps yes, there's big improvement in terms of how the beachfront looks now and in terms of the limitations in the activities, but we actually have to dig deeper in terms of the impact in terms of the income of those who are living in the area, in terms also of the types of establishments and businesses that were affected there. So
Yeah.
right now I don't have an answer.
Okay. Yeah, just to add, my view is the impacts that were actually shown as impacts of closure are actually impacts of unsustainable management of the island. So what the closure did was just to accelerate what would have been an impact in so many years' time. Because when we close down, then you see this immediate loss of jobs or immediate decline in the revenue of certain industries. This just accelerated because of the closure. But if we didn't close it because of unsustainable management of the island, eventually this would have been the effect anyway.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Quimba and Dr. Lim. But related to that, we were just talking about Boracay and then possibilities maybe of closure of other destinations, which, as pointed out, we still don't have really the evidence to really pursue that particular track. But we haven't really talked about, let's say, dispersal. Because as pointed out earlier in some of the photos, it could be a matter of perspective that one area is really like overcrowded or there's over-tourism. But within the environs of an area, within the environs of the island, there could be other areas where we could actually develop tourism and really move, and disperse the benefits towards those areas through tourism circuits maybe. So are there examples happening, let's say, in ASEAN or in some of the studies that you may have encountered in the process of looking at the socioeconomic consequences of Boracay Island closure that could be used as models for these types of dispersal so that we really avoid, another maybe closure to happen?
It's hard to provide specific examples with actual results because that we wouldn't be needing a study for that. But again, using Boracay as an example, when I was still with the Department of Environment and DNR, we already saw. And Alan and I have been talking about diversification for a long time. We need to diversify activities like, the beachfront may not just be the attraction that you have, and you also have, as I mentioned, you have caves, you have birding, you have a lot of birds as well in Boracay, where other activities can also be promoted. And then also there are communities there. There's an indigenous community as well in Boracay, and they have started small, the cottage industry, which could have been promoted as well. So these are and then in Boracay, there are areas that can be used for diving, but then there are areas that can be for beach. So yeah, so this in just one island in the Philippines, can you imagine how many activities can be undertaken if we did a proper study? So it's in the same way, other islands in the Philippines can also achieve the same diversification and dispersal of tourists.
Actually, actually, we don't really yet have an understanding of how people value, for instance, a park or a beach or going to climbing a mountain versus going to the beach. So because if we have that valuation, then we would know that certain groups would actually value maybe going to beaches, going to parks, going to then that would maybe allow us to plan that we should promote going to the beach maybe during summer or so having an understanding of the behavior of people and how much they value certain types of activities, then that would also maybe provide evidence on how we can do policy for dispersion.
Thank you. And also maybe find out how we can link the other areas of Malay municipality and other areas of the province of Aklan to Boracay as the core attraction for a particular activity or sets of activities. Okay, so are there other questions from our partners? Yes, please.
Good morning, I'm Violet from Nature Awareness Club, and what we do is corporate social responsibility through sustainable tourism. My question for the panels, can you suggest how we bring these ideas? You have excellent ideas, excellent practices to the tour operators, suppliers, and agency because we have these ideas, but when we do the actual things, just a suggestion lang po. When we do the actual thing, it's the presentation. What's happening is way different. Some are like irresponsible tourism, coming from even the operators pa lang. And of course, they're not giving good examples already to the tourists. So can you suggest good practices for the owners of travel agencies and operators?
Yeah. Well, this is actually this exercise is already a brilliant idea for sharing information. So I congratulate the organizers. And then, of course, with social media, I did mention social media. The page that I made as an example is also a way for informing tourist operators what the market likes, what is the emerging trend in the market as well, and then for tourism operators, you need to start talking to your suppliers as well. You need to involve the entire supply chain. It's not just the operators, but the food, the beverage, the accommodations, and all of them must be at the same page. When talking about sustainability, and so this will take some time, but we are working on it. I'm happy that we have this forum that we can talk about it. Alan and Rajah Tours is already talking about potential partnerships with the center and with the academe. So these are all opportunities that we can find. Partnership with the communities as well, but it's so hard to be, as I mentioned, to be very prescriptive, because it will eventually depend on where you want, what areas you would like to develop or to promote for your ecotourism or your sustainable tourism activity.
Maybe I just have 4 points. So first, I think really important is awareness. And what awareness in terms of the value of biodiversity and in terms of sustainable environment. So it's important that we teach not only those who are in tertiary education, but also elementary. So we incorporate these understanding in the basic education. But also it's important that we leverage the use of ICT as Ma'am has already mentioned Facebook, Twitter, all these things. We spread the word that it's important, that we value, and we just use those services that are promoting environmental sustainability. And also, finally, it's also important that, as also Ma'am has mentioned, we, especially for those who are in the upper tier of the supply chain, those who are actually, who have a number of suppliers that are coming to them, it's important that you actually impose to your suppliers the use of environmental sustainable processes and techniques. And because this is how, for example, a big manufacturing company like Toyota can actually improve the standards of all its suppliers. They tell them, you follow our standards, otherwise we won't get any supplies from you or any parts from you. So that's also the same way here. If you are a big supplier or if you are a big tour operator, impose on your suppliers these standards. It will be hard because, and as Toyota has learned, they really need to handhold some of their suppliers in order to meet certain standards. But in the end, there's actually a lot of development happening by just doing, by imposing standards and actually assisting your suppliers to meet those standards.
Okay, thank you very much. So it's really a culture of promoting what we call due diligence or responsible business conduct. For those who are interested on how you can actually move outside of your own business environment and also relate to how you impact on the society, the people, environment outside of your companies. The OECD has given very good guidelines on due diligence up to the enterprise level. Okay, so if there are no more questions, I think we can, yes, we have one question from a student. Yes, please approach one of our staff.
Hello, good morning. I'm Leonard Papa from De La Salle Araneta University. We got an interest to the capacity building efforts. The question is, how can students like us be able to participate to the capacity building efforts?
I'm very happy to inform you that the ASEAN Center for Biodiversity also has an ASEAN Youth for Biodiversity program. So this is an opportunity for youth to be engaged in activities such as our sustainable mainstreaming biodiversity into the tourism sector. So if you want to know more about it, I have my colleagues from the ASEAN Center who are here who can give you some information on how you can be involved in our activities in the ASEAN.
Thank you. Thank you, po.
Okay. All right, so we now conclude our first half of the Travel Talks session. I'd like to thank, on behalf of the Knowledge Center of Rajah Travel Corporation, Dr. Francis Mark Quimba and Dr. Teresa Mundita Lim for generously sharing their time with us this morning. So thank you.